or recurrent laryngeal nerve, arises on the right side in front of the subclavian artery, winds from before backward around that vessel, and ascends obliquely to the side of the trachea behind the common carotid artery, and either in front of or behind the inferior thyroid artery. On the left side it arises on the left of the arch of the aorta, and winds below the aorta at the point where the ligamentum arteriosum is attached, and then ascends to the side of the trachea. The nerve on either side ascends in the groove between the trachea and the esophagus, passes under the lower border of the constrictor pharyngis inferior, and enters the larynx behind the articulation of the inferior cornu of the thyroid cartilage with the cricoid. It is distributed to all the muscles of the larynx, excepting the cricothyroideus. It communicates with the internal branch of the superior laryngeal nerve, and gives off a few filaments to the mucous membrane of the lower part of the larynx. As the recurrent nerve hooks around the subclavian artery or aorta, it gives off several cardiac filaments to the deep part of the cardiac plexus. As it ascends in the neck it gives off branches, more numerous on the left than on the right side, to the mucous membrane and muscular coat of the esophagus, branches to the mucous membrane and muscular fibres of the trachea, and some pharyngeal filaments to the constrictor pharyngis inferior. The superior cardiac branches, rami cardiaci superiores, cervical cardiac branches, 2 or 3 in number, arise from the vagus at the upper and lower parts of the neck. The upper branches are small, and communicate with the cardiac branches of the sympathetic. They can be traced to the deep part of the cardiac plexus. The lower branch arises at the root of the neck, just above the first rib. That from the right vagus passes in front of, or by the side of the innominate artery, and proceeds to the deep part of the cardiac plexus. That from the left runs down the left side of the arch of the aorta, and joins the superficial part of the cardiac plexus. The inferior cardiac branches, rami cardiaci inferiores, thoracic cardiac branches, on the right side, arise from the trunk of the vagus as it lies by the side of the trachea, and from its recurrent nerve; on the left side from the recurrent nerve only; passing inward, they end in the deep part of the cardiac plexus. The anterior bronchial branches, rami bronchialis anteriores, anterior or ventral pulmonary branches, 2 or 3 in number, and of small size, are distributed on the anterior surface of the root of the lung. They join with filaments from the sympathetic, and form the anterior pulmonary plexus. The posterior bronchial branches, rami bronchialis posteriores, posterior or dorsal pulmonary branches, more numerous and larger than the anterior, are distributed on the posterior surface of the root of the lung. They are joined by filaments from the third and fourth, sometimes also from the first and second, thoracic ganglia of the sympathetic trunk, and form the posterior pulmonary plexus. Branches from this plexus accompany the ramifications of the bronchi through the substance of the lung. The esophageal branches, rami esophagei, are given off both above and below the bronchial branches. The lower are numerous and larger than the upper. They form, together with the branches from the opposite nerve, the esophageal plexus. From this plexus filaments are distributed to the back of the pericardium. The gastric branches, rami gastrici, are distributed to the stomach. The right vagus forms the posterior gastric plexus on the postero-inferior surface of the stomach, and the left the anterior gastric plexus on the antero-superior surface. The coeliac branches, rami coeliaci, are mainly derived from the right vagus. They join the coeliac plexus and through it supply branches to the pancreas, spleen, kidneys, suprarenal bodies, and intestine. The hepatic branches, rami hepatici, arise from the left vagus. They join the hepatic plexus and through it are conveyed to the liver. End of Part 32.